Skrulls! That's right, we're back to talk about everyone's favorite shape-shifting aliens. And for good reason, too, because, oh boy, if we don't get any more MCU content soon, I think I'm going to actually explode. So, why talk about all of this now, at all? Secret Wars or Secret Invasion hasn't been officially announced. Avengers 5, 6, or 7 could be about literally anything other than Secret Wars. Well, true, and that's a fair point. However, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that the MCU is setting up some version of Secret Invasion or Secret Wars. Let me lay out some of the evidence before we get into the video. First of all, Talos and Soren in Spider-Man Far From Home. I mean, that came out of left field, but not in a bad way necessarily, because all of a sudden, the way we view Nick Fury and Maria Hill fundamentally shift in that film. It's clear that entering Phase 4, Feige isn't even close to being done with these Skrulls. Seriously guys, where is Fury? Well, the answer to that, he's on a spaceship, presumably manning S.W.O.R.D. with Skrulls everywhere. And on top of all of that, the Russo brothers have been hinting for a long time that they'd be interested in returning to the MCU if there was a Secret Wars story. And they recently even said that the only story that would be bigger than Infinity Saga would be Secret Invasion. It just makes so much sense. And think about it. If the MCU was expanding to the multiverse, how massive of a movie would it be if you had heroes from all different dimensions coming out, not to fight one big bad, but to fight each other? Doctor Doom and Reed Richards teaming up to take down Skrull Thing and Skrull Johnny Storm. I mean, honestly, it would be incredible. But you might be asking, well, AB, aren't Skrulls good guys in this Marvel Cinematic Universe? Yes and no. You see, while the Skrulls we've been seeing thus far have been good, who's to say that there aren't going to be some sort of bad sect of them that come out of the woodworks threatening life as we know it? Kevin Feige even confirmed that, like humans, who are not all entirely good or entirely bad, there are good Skrulls and there are bad Skrulls. So, in today's episode of Rank It, I'm going to be sharing my top 10 picks of characters from the MCU that I think are most likely to be revealed in Phase 4 and 5 as having been Skrulls at one point or another. I'll discuss where and when they might have been swapped, because I don't think that all of these people had been Skrulls the entire time. We'll also be discussing what this means for the MCU moving forward. Keep in mind that these Skrulls may not actually be bad Skrulls. Like in Nick Fury's case, they might actually even be good. Before we get started with this video, make sure to subscribe to support the channel, and comment who you think are Skrulls in the MCU. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss them down below. Here we go. Before we get into the main list, here are some honorable mentions. Starting with the no-brainers because, well, they are Skrulls, Nick Fury and Maria Hill. I mean, you have to assume that Maria Hill is somewhere on that spaceship with Fury, seeing as Talos and Soren were covering for them both. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that Fury called in a few favors because I guess he had better things to do, and he asked his old buddy Talos to cover for him. As simple as that. Now, the bigger question arises of how long has this been going on? And honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Here's what I do think. I think that Nick Fury, through the Winter Soldier, is the real Nick Fury. However, after he sort of goes off the grid until Age of Ultron, I think anything's fair game, and to be honest, I think it's a perfect transition and reason for Fury to disappear and be replaced by a Skrull if he's, well, presumed to be dead. I'm not saying that Fury actually died and was quickly replaced by Talos. I think that Fury did indeed survive that Winter Soldier injury, and after the events of the film, maybe went off to investigate things. So he might have asked Talos to cover for him. Let's cover the rest of his appearances. Age of Ultron. I think he very well could be a Skrull. There's really nothing that leans to a particular side, so sure, why not? Makes sense in continuity. Infinity War and Endgame Nick Fury. I'm gonna say no. I think seeing him dust and his first instinct was to call Carol, I think that's Nick, not Talos. And also, how dumb would it be to retcon that it wasn't actually Fury at Tony's funeral, and it was a Skrull who had no idea who Tony Stark was? That's so lame. No, that was the real Fury. Next up are some minor characters, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and a government agent, namely Sharon Carter and Everett Ross. They're on the list presumably because, well, honestly, why not? Because if there was a secret invasion, then the Skrulls would need to infiltrate the government somehow to convince them of the Avengers' danger, right? Perfect, we have Everett Ross, who I have to assume will make some sort of appearance in later MCU films or shows. As for Sharon Carter, well, we know that she's going to be in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, so it makes sense that her role continues onward in the MCU. Who's to say that she's not going to be a Skrull later on? And finally, rounding out this list, we have some random new characters that totally could be Skrulls. Yelena Belova, Shang-Chi, Monica Rambeau, sure. Any of them could be Skrulls, but we just don't know it yet. And again, I'm focusing more on established characters who may have been replaced at some point in the past. Alrighty, now on to the top 10. Coming in at number 10, we have everyone's Infinity War favorite and Endgame less favorite Avenger, Thor. He's at number 10 for a reason, folks. I don't think it's very likely that he's a Skrull, to be honest, but hey, you never know. Let's look at some arguments for him being a Skrull. Well, first of all, he underwent a massive personality change between Age of Ultron and Ragnarok. Like, when I say massive, I mean massive, because those two characters, the one from Age of Ultron and the one from Ragnarok, are two completely different people. And yes, I know behind the scenes we have to take a step back and realize different directors, different writers, blah, 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 but come on, still, let's have some fun here. In addition, if Kevin Feige wanted a super powerful Avenger to be a Skrull, well, he's being replaced already by Jane Foster and Valkyrie anyways, so yeah, there's your out. If you needed to do a little Thor v Jane Foster action in Secret Invasion, well, there you go. Now, let's be fair and look at the cons. Well, I guess his entire Endgame arc then was useless then, huh? Because that wasn't really him. And really, would you want to sacrifice one of the big three to being a Skrull? Keeping him around post-Endgame actually may sway me towards pro-Skrull because, well, that tells me that Marvel may have some plans for him in the future, and maybe that plan is to make him a Skrull? Unless he just dies in Love and Thunder, which is possible seeing as he's getting replaced. At any rate, this pick isn't so serious, but I thought it'd be a fun notion to play with. Speaking of familiar faces in original Avengers, coming at number 9 is Hulk. Hear me out on this one. What in the world happened to Hulk after Ragnarok? Now, I get it, Thanos beat him and he got scared and all that, but then in the 5-year period, he just reconciles just like that? Again, he's at number 9 for a reason. I understand that this isn't super likely either, but still. That 5-year window is really interesting to me, and I'd love for them to explore that in one way or another, Skrull or not. There's not a lot of evidence for some of these characters to go off of, so you'll notice that I'm picking characters that have a little fishy element to their storylines, like some discrepancies in their character or their plot lines. Because to me, one way to just take care of those discrepancies is just to make them Skrulls. Because the jarring revelation of Smart Hulk in Endgame was just jarring. Would it have been such a stretch to say he got replaced in between? Not to me, at least. I don't think it would have been a huge stretch to think that at all, actually. And having a character as powerful as the Hulk is a really interesting notion to have. And I don't even necessarily mean having a Skrull version of the Hulk be as powerful. I mean having the real Berserker Rage Hulk somewhere out there locked up in a Skrull prison, having been replaced by an imposter. Because to me, there's the gateway to bring back that version of Hulk, and I really missed him in Endgame. But again, cons, well, how could he have snapped? Are Skrulls literally powerful enough to take the full might of 6 Infinity Stones? Probably not, so there's that. Still though, I miss the old Hulk, and if this gets him back, then I'm in. Coming in at number 8 is none other than Spider-Man, but not for the reasons you may think. This is the first instance of good Skrulls, because what do we see at the end of Far From Home? Well, Peter Parker just got outed by Mysterio. How do we fix that? Well, if we're going the Skrull route, pretty simple. The real Fury calls in a few favors, maybe ships over a dead Skrull to Earth dressed as Spider-Man. The people find him and realize that the one that Mysterio quote-unquote framed was a Skrull, and real Spider-Man comes out and says, "No guys, that wasn't me." Something like that. The point is that having a Skrull pose as Spider-Man in the future is a viable option to solve that whole crisis. I know that this video is primarily concerned with who was a Skrull in the past, but I thought that this would be an interesting enough angle to include here. Because technically, yeah, it would mean that Spider-Man was a Skrull, though probably not for very long. And thank goodness too. Coming in at number 7, we have Natasha Romanov. Now this one's interesting. If Marvel for any reason wanted to retcon her death somehow, well, here's how. If for some narrative purpose, and again, I have no idea why they would do this, but if they decided they wanted to do this, and they wanted to revive Black Widow, then have her be a Skrull since Winter Soldier, or since Age of Ultron, since Civil War, since Infinity War. There are so many places where Natasha could have been replaced by a Skrull. Does that cheapen her death? Oh, absolutely it does. But if Marvel really wanted to do it, they could. And again, the very nature of her character is being a double-crossing, quote-unquote, shape-shifting spy. It would fit so well with the character that we know already. And it would be interesting to see how that would play out going forward because we do have Yelena Belova on the horizon. Would they reveal this in Black Widow? Feige did say that watching Black Widow would cause you to see Infinity War and Endgame totally differently. And revealing her to be a Skrull between Civil War and Infinity War? Yeah, that would definitely make me think twice about that Vormir scene. So, I don't know. We'll see about this one, but I think out of all the possibilities, this one's the most open-ended. Coming in at number 6, we have Thunderbolt Ross. Now, this is one that a lot of people like to talk about first, but it's actually pretty low on my list because of one reason. It doesn't really look like the MCU is wanting to take him to the Skrull territory because I think they're pretty clearly setting him up to be the Red Hulk. And if he just ended up being a Skrull, well again, that's pretty lame. That being said, he's another natural choice. What, you're telling me that he just disappears after the Incredible Hulk and reappears suddenly to reprimand the Avengers and try to tear them apart with the Sokovia Accords? And then he's hunting down Black Widow? I mean, come on. If the Skrulls wanted to tear the Avengers apart, this was the perfect candidate. And trust me, if it weren't for the Red Hulk arc, he'd probably be number 1 or 2 on this list. I just think that all things considered, Marvel wants to move him towards Red Hulk and the Thunderbolts, and by making Red Hulk a Skrull, that's honestly really going to cheapen the whole arc for the character, I think. Coming in at number 5, we have Hawkeye or Ronin. This could go either one of 2 ways. It could go the Spider-Man route, for one, having a good Skrull come up to clear his name. Because think of all of the foreign governments that probably want Clint Barton in jail after what he did in that 5-year period. A lot of people would probably be super mad, and having a Skrull pretend to be him and come out and admit it, it would clear him pretty quickly. On the flip side, out of the 4 remaining OG Avengers, I think he's the most likely to be a Skrull simply because there aren't many restrictions and there would be some stakes. I mean, what's stopping anyone from saying he's a Skrull? Nothing, really. Not like with Thor, where he has his whole endgame arc. Not with Bruce, where he snapped his fingers. Not with Nat, where she literally died. Hawkeye could have been a Skrull basically at any point, and we wouldn't have even known it. And that would give some real stakes, too, because if the real Clint was out there, then Barton is separated from his family, and that gives some real tension and reasons for the Avengers to fight the Skrulls. Or even, what if his entire family are Skrulls? That would make sense, too, actually, come to think of it. Point being, for Hawkeye, the possibilities are also completely wide open. Coming in at number 4, we have James Rhodes or the War Machine. Now, I put him on this list for 3 reasons. Because A, he's in a position of high power potentially within the government. B, because he has little development and this is wide open, in his backstory at least. And C, because he's a big enough Avenger to where this would matter. There were really serious considerations by the writers of Endgame to make him the vice president during the 5-year period. If The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or some other series or film, reveals that he is, in fact, in a high position of power in the government, well, guess what? There's your in for the Skrulls. There's your way to infiltrate the government. On top of that, we literally know nothing about Rhodey's backstory. And when I mean nothing, I mean nothing. Who is this guy? Other than just an Air Force colonel. I have no idea, and there's some room to explore there. Maybe he was taken over as early as pre-Iron Man, and he was sent to spy on Tony in the Avengers Initiative. Who knows? I think much like Clint, there's a lot to explore here because his past is just so open-ended. There's so many opportunities for Skrulls to have invaded his life, and like I mentioned before, he's a powerful enough Avenger to where this would matter for the team. Coming in at number 3, we have the new Captain America, the Falcon. Now with Sam, things get interesting. Wouldn't it be a really, really neat angle to take if the new Captain America, the guy who took over the mantle for Steve, if he was a Skrull? And now the Skrulls have possession of one of the most recognizable mantles in the MCU in Captain America, as well as a vibranium shield. That would be super great for them. On top of that, if the Skrulls are going to invade and really tear the Avengers apart, they need a heavy hitter. And who better to take over than Captain America himself? Or I guess Falcon in this case. Maybe shortly after he gets the shield, they capture him and replace him with a Skrull, and it's revealed that the guy who's supposed to be standing up for America is secretly an alien imposter. I think while it may not be the likeliest for Falcon to be a Skrull, I think it would be one of the most interesting characters to take this angle with. Because he's not quite there to the A-list tier of the Avengers to where it would be a super huge blow like Thor, but at the same time he's becoming super important because he's taking on the mantle of Captain America, and I think that he would be the perfect target for the Skrulls to take over. However, speaking of the Falcon, coming at number 2, I have his partner in crime, Bucky Barnes or the Winter Soldier. Because who would be more interesting to see as a Skrull than his partner Falcon? How about the brainwashed former Hydra agent? Now, like I mentioned before, there's not a lot of evidence for anyone to be a Skrull, and you could twist anyone's plotline to have them be a Skrull. So, as you've noticed by now, a lot of my reasonings have been more of, it would be interesting if they took this angle or that angle. And while that may not be the most convincing angle in terms of evidence from previous MCU films, I think it's also equally as valid. Because if we're looking from Feige's perspective, I think we have to consider what is the most logical place to take these characters if they were to be Skrulls, and what would be the most interesting to audiences. Hence, Bucky Barnes. This could have happened at so many different points. At any time in the 1900s when he was frozen or whatever, he could have been replaced by a Skrull. Maybe he just faked the code words thing and was just pretending all along. This is to say that he wasn't just going along with those assassinations not because Hydra wanted him to, but because he was trying to destabilize the US for the Skrulls. Killing Howard and Maria Stark? Perfect for an invading Skrull army. I know there are a lot of restrictions with this, like how does the whole brainwashing thing work, but I think it would be a really fascinating arc because this character has such a rich and interesting history in the MCU that hasn't really been explored. And making him a Skrull at some point, more than anything, would be such a monumental shift in his character, more than almost any other character, that I think it would be well worth it to see where his character goes from here. And again, because he didn't take on the mantle of Captain America, this would be another really interesting place to take the character, other than just being the sidekick in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Coming in at number 1, however, is Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers herself. There are some major red flags here, and I think that might be really interesting. For one, well, she's literally been in contact with the Skrulls. That was a part of her movie, right? Switching her out at a certain point in the MCU is not very hard to do, considering that she has had contact with the Skrulls. Disguise the haircut in the 5-year period in Endgame with her being a Skrull? Sure, why not? And secondly, this would be a huge power redistribution and rebalancing if there was going to be a Secret Wars. Imagine what it would be like to have Carol Danvers as a Skrull on the opposing side. That immediately puts everyone at a disadvantage. Captain Marvel as a villain? Now that's interesting. Plus, it's an easy way to reset her personality as well. I'm not saying I hated her in her solo film, but in Endgame she was so unbelievably arrogant and just harsh and wooden to the rest of the Avengers, it was almost unbelievable. It was crazy. So if you want to make her more likable, then say she was a Skrull. Again, let me be clear, I'm not saying this because of any agenda or anything. I say the same thing about the first Thor and the Thor character because I think he was arrogant beyond likability. And I think her character just needs to grow a little bit, and making her a Skrull, this could be an easy and a very cool way to do it. And before you go into the comments and say, what about Zemo, what about Ronan, I know I didn't mention any villains in this video, and I just wanted to focus on the quote-unquote good characters in the MCU. I do understand that there is a huge possibility that a ton of the villains may have been Skrulls at certain points, like Zemo or like Ronan. And so if you want me to do a video on those as well, then leave a comment down below. At any rate, those were my rankings of the top 10 likeliest Avengers or good characters in the MCU to be Skrulls. I'd love to know what your top 10 is, and if you think I missed anyone, then let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button to support the channel, and if you want to see more, then click the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.